Okay, so it's a much delayed video that I was supposed to be releasing last week, but I was away for the week and I was pretty sick yesterday, so this is a bit late. I have got quite a bit more done since the last video, including a landscape picture, finishing the first draft of the maps, and doing some more creature work. So today I'm going to do a bit of a longer video, or at least I'm going to cover more things. So first we're going to start with, obviously we know this landscape drawing that I did. It's one of the first ones I've done, so I'm going to be redrawing this at some point. And this is just the mountains with the I can't pronounce it properly. It's either taiga or taiga biome. Basically just your typical forests with pine trees or redwoods. And then it rolls into these like grasslands and farmlands with a little town or a city down here. So yeah, this is one of the landscapes. Now, where this is situated is very roughly down here on the map. It's at the foot of this part of the mountain ranges. So there's some taiga biome running all the way through this area, and then grasslands down here, which will eventually run down into some more little woods and forests before reaching the extreme cold south. So that's where that location is. And now I've finished at the first of the desert biomes. Now this is like a canyon, unfortunately, because it's quite red. It's a bit oversaturated on this camera, but there's like an arch here which is closer to the camera, and then this is all in the distance. So we have in the distance here some mountain ranges and the river running through this canyon. So it's nothing really amazing. There's a city down there, city with some like not man-made because they're cats, but artificially planted parks and little fields as well, and some of the city crosses over to this side of the canyon as well. And there's a big road network going all the way up. So that area is located roughly, now I need to make sure I'm pointing at the right place on this map, because it's roughly over here, because there's a little bit of a canyon with a river here, and in the distance you saw those mountains. So that's some locations. I'm still doing more of the landscapes. They just take a lot longer than the creatures and the plants and all those types of things. It's like it took me ages to do that map, and I'm not entirely happy with it. But today we've finished the jungle creatures. This is the jungle plants. Now this is one of the first pictures I uploaded onto Twitter, and most of these are named already. And in the brackets it defines what they kind of taste like. So we have the puri fruit, which is kind of like a sweet spice, more like a cinnamon or a nutmeg in taste. And then the epi fruit, which is as it looks like a chili. And we have this mushroom like thing here, which I've just put fat, but I meant it's supposed to be kind of greasy, quite fatty, compared to the typical mushroom. And we have the root vegetable here, which has two colours. There's two versions of the same plant. If it's purely purple all the way, it's poisonous. If it's purple at the top and orange underneath, then that's edible. You can eat both sides of it, but if it's fully purple, you can't eat it because it's actually a poisonous version of it. And this weird plant here that produces the epi flowers and the epi fruit is actually a secondary fruit source. It's more like a watermelon, but with a cacti kind of texture on the outside. So as you can see, I mean, I drew the puri tree with the mushrooms at the bottom, and the puris inside the area here, and the epiplant with the, you know, all the bits and bobs there. Obviously, there's more edible plants, but those are the primary ones. So most of the Maru will use the puri fruit, which is about the size of a banana, a normal banana. They usually use those for pies and, you know, typical desserts. I haven't, you know, drawn anything for those yet. I will eventually, once I've finished all the plants and animals. Now, because this is a longer video, I'm going to go into doing all the desert animals, but I won't be doing the desert plants this time. So we've already done the apex predator, which was the Narn, which we already have done. So that's the top predator in the desert, which are obviously, if I can use the map now, is all of the area here, which is kind of the sandish colour, and there is some green in there as well. But all this area that's sandy colour, that is where you will find all these animals I'm just going to show, except for the Geton, which it looks like a velociraptor. They can be found in the little swamps, neighbouring swamps, and a few areas of the rainforest as well. So here we go. This is the aforementioned raptor-like creature, the Geton. They're a highly adaptable creature. They were not native to Idris. They were a genetically modified animal brought by the Ulne when the planet was revived by the galactic community. The only reason why they were brought around is because the original medium-sized predator for the desert biome hadn't been salvaged. There's a lot of animals that were destroyed when the ecosystem collapsed. Some of them had members of their race or species off-world already. So in the case of the Narn, there was an alien culture nearby that likes dragon creatures. So what they did was they bought several specimens off of the native Feles before the ecosystem collapsed. So what the Ulne did was they salvaged DNA from those specimens to revive that species, and that's the case for a lot of the animals. But this is one of the animals that didn't get salvaged because there wasn't a demand for them. They were too primitive. They couldn't be trained. They were very, very violent. They work in packs, so they couldn't be trusted. Whereas the Narn, as big and fierce as it is, it can be on its own, it can be independent, but it can also be trained. Whereas these guys, they wouldn't be trained. Now, on the other hand here, we have, it's a bit hard to show, the Pheton, which is a very large bird. It's basically like a eagle, or crossed with a vulture. So they're quite adaptable. They can eat carrion, which is, you know, scavenging, and they can also eat things live. They prefer other birds, so there are smaller little birds that show up around the planet of Idris, but they're not really that unique or extremely special to the ecosystem. So I haven't really bothered to draw them. There's hundreds, you know, most of them in the dreams look just like our modern day birds, like the blackbird, the sparrow, things like that. So, I mean, I'm only really drawing the things that are larger or very unique or referenced quite a lot in the stories. So these birds can actually be trained for hunting and, you know, finding resources. So what a lot of the Feles who live in the desert do is, if they're in small villages, they train those birds to find these guys so that they can be hunted. What they don't do is use the birds to find things like water, because they use other means to find water, using like the Jago, which is the big mouth, the one that digs for tubers. They're good at finding water. These guys need to be hunted because they're like wolves. They work in packs and they can decimate entire livestock. So they need to be kept in check. And what they do need is the likes of this bird here to help find these guys before they find you. So that's these medium-sized ones. This raptor is about the size of a large dog. I'd say probably like a is it a Malamute? They're like a German Shepherd, really. They're quite big. And then this bird here is about the size of a gold eagle, maybe a bald eagle. They're about the same size, I reckon. But yeah, they both eat meat, obviously. This will eat anything. This will only eat smaller animals, whereas they won't mind just ganging up on something. And now for smaller animals. Now there's 4 here, and they are all slightly different, not only in the terms of how they look, but also the species, because so far what I've shown are very dinosaur, bird and dragon. We've only had 1 mammal so far. This thing here is very, very strange because it's based on a armored worm. So it's not a snake, it's actually just like an armored worm. It uses these mandibles to grab prey and just hold it tight. And it has only this section of its tail unarmored. This area would be underground. That's its weak spot. So predators who would prey on this would primarily go and target this area, and you can't actually break through this armor with teeth. You actually have to rip the thing out through its only weak spot here. So yeah, that's its weak spot. So that's why it's not armored. And this little creature here is just like a typical rodent. They're not very special. They're only drawn because they appear so often in the books, because they're vermin. Although, unlike the Nuk-Nuk, which just screams for no reason, these guys are quiet. They keep to themselves, but they're a silent menace because they will actually ravage entire crops. And grain warehouses. So, as cute as they look, they're actually a right nuisance. And they made great pets originally in the traditional Idris, so a lot of natives would actually have them as pets, but they don't really use them now as pets. Whereas, this thing down here is very strange. It's born without a mouth. There's absolutely nothing. I've dreamt this world for so many years now, and this thing still appears, but there's no evidence as to how or why it even exists. It doesn't eat anything. It doesn't get eaten by anything. It just roams around the desert floor or up little cliff faces and goes into little cracks and crevices and is just gone. But it was so surreal, I thought I might as well draw it. It kind of reminds me of the soot sprites from the Studio Ghibli films, like My Neighbor Totoro, but it's an actual animal. It's got tiny little limbs underneath it that you can't see. So, yeah, it's really, really strange. That's probably one of the only animals that survived the ecosystem collapse, because it can live without a mouth, without eating. So, it's very strange. Now we're on to the last of the smaller animals. These guys, just like a dog, really. They're dragons still, so they're primarily scaled. They have these big spines, the horns, and some spike on the tail. They do have tufts of fur around the neck area. Primarily, this is the female. The male has a red face and horns that curve forwards rather than backwards. And they're just a carnivore that can be trained as well. They're primarily used as hunting dogs by the natives who live in the desert. So, yeah, in terms of size, This is about the size of your typical grey squirrel, your American grey squirrel, or your European red squirrel. So any squirrels you have, this is about the size of a squirrel. This thing varies in size from a small mouse to a large rat. This is about the size of a Rottweiler, so another dog. But they're obviously smaller than the raptor ones. And this thing varies in size because they can grow to almost infinite size, but they don't obviously get to colossal sizes because they get eaten most of the time. But they can grow from the size of a common snake, like a rattlesnake, all the way to, I'd say, 20 foot long. So they can grow massive. These things would usually, when they're large, actually pose a risk to the apex predators. But they're primarily left alone because they live underground and they only burst out of the ground when they need to eat. The apex predators of them primarily fly, so the only time they'd actually eat those is after they'd seen them come up, and then they'll catch them as they're going back underground because of that weakness at the back. So, yeah, that's this week's video. Again, I'm making up for the fact that I didn't record one last week, and this is a bit late, so I hope you've enjoyed the artwork so far. There's more to come. We have the desert plants to come up next before we move on to the final of the biomes that I've drawn so far, which is the Taiga biome. There will be more after this, but they're not being drawn yet. So thank you again for checking the video out. If you like this artwork, remember I upload snapshots all the time whenever they're finished to my Twitter account, which is @Zoopaboo. And I do upload them as well to Snapchat and Instagram, but very rarely because I prefer to use Twitter. So if you like them, check them out there, and I'll catch you next time. Ta-ra!